Rajesh sir, please begin.
Okay, a very good morning to all the viewers. Myself, Dr. Rajesh Singh, Associate Professor, Parul Institute of Law, Parul University. Warm welcome all the speakers and dignitaries from the Parul University. First of all, the topic of this FDP program is on the legal management of the COVID-19 gaps between the law and enforcement. Our speaker are as follows. Number one is Mr. Arjya B. Majumdar, who is the professor in law at OP Jindal Global University. And I will go through his academic records also. And second speaker is Mr. Viswajit Chaudhary, advocate from Delhi. And with me, Dr. Pallavi Dubey, who is associate professor, is also the part of this event. She is also joined. So I also warm welcome ma'am, Dr. Pallavi Dubey ma'am. First of all, I will go to the introductory part of all the speakers. So I'm just starting. Sir has Mr. Arjya B. Majumdar. He is the professor in law, and he is right now professor in law at OP Jindal Global University. According to his profile, Sir has worked with the senior advocates for the Fox Bundle and Desai and Divanji company of the law firm. He has handled the complex transaction relating to the acquisition matter, FDI matter, private equity, mergers, capital market, and real estate. He has converted his real life experience into the classroom discussion and also allowing the various experience of his practical in the law firms to the students. He is previously served as a JGU at Dean Admission and Outreach. At that point of time, he was looking after the various implementation of the university and the strategy of the outreach of the student requirement as well as various academic planning. He was also an academic director at JGU. He is also taken various consultancy projects at this point of time, and he is a very renowned professor at JJU. So on this note, I warm welcome you, sir. After that, Mr. Viswajit Chaudhary, who is one of the renowned advocate at Delhi, and he is one of the finest advocate at Delhi. I can say he is totally based on Delhi, and he is practicing in criminal law and constitutional law. He is the qualified barrister from London and hold a master of degree from the Cambridge University. He has published a number of number of articles and books on the academia and publishing the various articles on the newspapers and medias also in the Tribune, Outlook, etc. Furthermore, now I will tell about our dean and director, who is the director at Parul Institute of Law from last 4 years. Sir, Dr. Akhil Sayyed sir is the director at Parul Institute of Law, Dean, Law Faculty, Parul University. He has done his MSc Physics and LLM in Business Law. He is the first PhD holder from Gujarat National Law University and having a total of 25 years of teaching experience across his career. He is also participating in the management programs at Parul University and is the one of the good performer at Parul University. Furthermore, I am also introducing you, sir, Professor Jatin Vaidya, who is the principal of Polytechnic Institute. Professor Jatin Vaidya is the principal at Parul Institute of Polytechnic and having experience of 18 years. He has done his mechanical engineering from Maharaja Siyaji Rao University of Baroda, and he is in charge of this COVID-19 compliances at Parul University, sir. So I also warm welcome Jatin, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Just a minute. So now I will tell Dr. Akhil Sayyed, sir. I am audible to you, sir?
Yes,
yes.
Yes.
So I just hand over to Akhil Sayyed, sir, to warm welcome both the speaker, Professor Arjya B. Majumdar, sir, and Mr. Viswajit Chaudhary, sir. Dr. Akhil, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rajesh. Thank you very much. I am very much happy to be here on this special program where you have organized an FDP, and that too with the Faculty of Engineering Science. And I'm very much happy to see my friend and my colleague Professor Jatin Vaidya here on the same platform. At the same time, I cordially welcome Professor Majumdar from OP Jindal Global Law School. Sir, welcome. It's our great pleasure that you have been kind enough to spare your valuable time for the faculty members of the Parul University, Parul family. Sir, ours is a private university, and since 2015, it has achieved the university status. But my colleague Jatin would tell you that since 92, this Parul group of institute is in existence and has set a benchmark in the higher education in the state of Gujarat. And now today it is, after the university status, it is the largest university in the western zone of India. And it's not only in the size, that is 150-acre piece of land, but also in the number of faculties and variety of the courses and the strength of the student. Sir, it's a great pleasure that you have been kind enough to accept our invitation. I thank you very much for your kindness. At the same time, I also welcome learned advocate Vishwajit Chaudhary Saab. Welcome, sir. It's a great pleasure. An academic institute, and that too particularly legal education institute, that is law school, runs well with the good relation with the bar and bench. And that is what we have always received. And for such a topic where law is not much in the action, that is about the corona and the precautions and the administration. I'm happy that learned advocate Vishwajit sir has kindly accepted to be a resource person, and I, as a professor of law, is also eager to listen you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Welcome at the Parul University virtual platform.
Thank you, Dr. Akhil Sayyed sir. Now I will tell Mr. Jatin Vaidya sir to say a few words and how
Yes, sir.
the Parul Institute is working on this COVID-19 right now.
Terrific.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, Rajesh sir. First, thanks to, actually, it's my pleasure to be a part with your program, because it is rightly said by Akhil sir, that is a very good combination of engineering, technology and the law. The first time I think such things happen, that the two fraternity of the two different wide discipline people come together, and that happens because of you only. And congratulations, sir. And today's, and I the topic which we have chosen today, the legal management of COVID-19 gaps between the laws and the enforcement. Really, it's really indeed this is the topic where people are not so much serious about that, and we make them too serious. So this is a wonderful topic, and this is indeed the times demand such type of topics and such type of creativity. We have to give the awareness to the people. So again, for the choosing such a wonderful topic, I'm congratulating, and I'm on behalf of Parul University, again I'm welcome to Vishwajit sir and Arjia Majumdar sir. So because they are also from very well-known universities, they both have the fraternity, and they are taking time and to give briefing our students about their sharing the knowledge, and that is again the wonderful things that are happening right now. And I'm welcoming the both of dignitaries. And again, I'm just briefing about how we are working at Parul University. Rightly said by the Rajesh sir also, that I am the more core member or in charge of the whole committee of the COVID, and we are having, sir, we are at 35,000 students we at Parul University, and it is very challenging job to control the whole process. And we have divided the two things. We are happily said that the vaccination drive, I'm so handling the vaccination drive to coordinate with the students and faculty members, and the both of the faculty members and both of the students both are now crossed 98% vaccination. That is a wonderful thing that we achieve, and landmark achieved by because of the awareness how we are how we are take the serious the things about the COVID, the topic related to topics, and already we are giving so much our management, and again involvement of our dynamic management, young management, for Dr. Devanshu sir's visions, and this all is happening because of his effort only. And we are running because he has asked us to run. and to force daily, okay, sir, you have to do, you have to give the awareness. And that because of that awareness, we restrict even the so much of students we have. Even we restrict to the COVID people. And in the COVID monitor, we have to, I already told you that we have the two vaccines. One program is vaccination drive, and second program we have the COVID monitoring. And that we have the committee of the each 12 members in committee for every day. And we ask to students to put mask always. And that is the big thing, that the achievement. And Rajesh sir is in the one of the chairman of the committee, and that's why he took me in the loop today's your webinar. So I am very fortunate, sir, and thanks and best wishes to all my students, all the viewers, because it is such a wonderful opportunity for them, and you created. Again, I'm congratulating Akil sir and the team. Rajesh sir, thank you, and thank you for inviting me, for listening me. So I'm not giving too much time. Thanks once again, sir.
Thank you, Jatin Vaidya sir. Now I will, this session will be started, and sir, at the last 10 minutes, we have question answer session. So some certain students will put the questions as well as the faculty members. So I will put to you both, sir. So first of all, the session will be started by Professor R.J.B. Majumdar, sir, who is the professor and renowned professor at O.P. Jindal Global University. Now I'm handing this session to you, sir.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much, Professor Rajesh, Dean Akhil Syed, Parul Institute of Law, Professor Rajesh Singh, Professor Parul, Professor Pallavi, Professor Vaidya, my dear friend Vishavjit Chaudhary, and other dignitaries on the panel, as well as all my attendees. A very good morning to all of you. Special thanks to Parul Institute of Law for inviting me. And I will not take too much time on initial comments, except that I cannot begin to express my admiration and my heartfelt thanks at Parul, at Parul Institute of Law to engage in a discussion on what is undoubtedly a biological virus from the lens of a social science, that of law and perhaps management. Now, this is one area that I'd like to start with. So when we realized sometime in January 2020, maybe even December 2019, that there was this virus in Wuhan in China, and that at some point of time it could come to Indian shores and it could affect us as well, the first reactions that we had is, okay, how do we prevent the spread? How do we prevent the Indian population from getting overtly affected, right? So immediately there were directions and instructions sent out on advisories on social distancing and masks and hand sanitizers, right? And these are things that we have learned over the last couple of years, and these have become part of our daily lives, our daily routines. However, sometime around March, our central government decided that the number of cases had reached a tipping point, and our Honorable Prime Minister came on air, I believe on the 24th of March, 2020, and with 4 hours notice, put the entire nation under an enforced lockdown, right? Now, the question is that there are two questions that come to mind. One is that under what law, right? Under what law could the Prime Minister's office or the central government have enforced such, a lockdown? One. Second is the 4-hour notice, which undoubtedly led to a lot of problems, a lot of panic, a lot of issues with a number of people, So let's deal with the 4-hour notice first. Why was it necessary to place a 4-hour notice? And why couldn't it have been done, earlier? So perhaps from a public policy standpoint, right? From a public policy standpoint, the Prime Minister wanted to showcase or wanted to communicate the urgency of the matter. As you must be aware, cases were rising on a daily basis back in March 2020, and the central government wanted to convey a sense of urgency, a sense of emergency. Which is why I believe that the 4-hour notice is perfectly legitimate. Yes, it led to a lot of hardship for a number of people. The question then that arises is that under what law could the central government have taken this decision? Now, presently, there are two acts of parliament that would apply in this case. The first is a very old and very archaic Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897. And the more recent 2005 Act of Disaster Management. So the Disaster Management Act. Now, the Epidemics Act obviously deals with epidemics specifically, right? And I believe it was enacted and then it was amended in light of the Spanish flu in the early 20th century, around 1919. At the same time, the Disaster Management Act gives us a wider range of problems or disasters to deal with, primarily coming out of the tsunami that hit the shores of Tamil Nadu around 2004, 2005. At that point of time, we realized that we needed some mechanism, some regulatory or legislative mechanism in order to react swiftly towards threats from disaster, threats towards human life, human livestock, threats to the economy, and so on and so forth. And therefore, under these two acts, the central government and the state government have been given wide sweeping powers to pretty much do anything and everything under the sun. Right? And therefore, you had a series of directives, a series of circulars that came out from the central government, from individual state governments. I'm quite certain that Gujarat state government has been very, proactive in telling its citizens what they can do and what they cannot do. Here, where I stay in Haryana, we are still getting a directive every few weeks from the Haryana government, from the headquarters in let's say Chandigarh, right, saying that okay, you can open up restaurants, but only 50% occupancy, and so on and so forth. Right? Now so we've understood the urgency of the matter, and we've understood under what law you can manage an epidemic or a pandemic like COVID-19. But this is where I want to come to the latter half of the topic of today's panel discussion, which is the gaps between law and enforcement. Right? Now we are told, do gaj ki duri, 6 feet social distancing. We are told, sanitize your hands often, wear a mask in public. I don't have a mask with me right now, otherwise I would have demonstrated. But I go out to Delhi and I see people wearing masks. They're not wearing them here, they're wearing them here, with their nose out, with their mouths out. I see some people wearing a mask around their necks. So now let us come to the gaps between the law and the enforcement. Many state governments have said, whenever you're stepping out in public, you must wear a mask. Great. We are wearing a mask. How we are wearing it is a different issue. So I would like to take this opportunity to sort of delve into the theory behind legal enforceability from a legislative standpoint. To my mind, and I'm quite certain Professor Vishwajit will analyze the practical aspects of this because he's the practicing advocate. But the enforcement of any law or any policy passed by the central or the state government, that enforcement comes in two ways. One, either a punitive enforcement, that if you don't do it, something bad will happen to you. You don't file your taxes on time, you will be fined. You drive very fast on a road, you will get a fine, you might go to jail also, and so on and so forth. So we understand the punitive side of enforcement. At the same time, there is a proactive side to enforcement as well, where through certain measures, the government can shape human behavior, shape how people react to a particular event, or shape how people behave in a particular way by giving people a positive reinforcement. Invest in certain long-term securities, you'll get a tax benefit, right? Donate money to a charitable organization, you'll get a tax benefit and a certificate, and you'll feel good about yourself. So these are both enforcement mechanisms where there is some element of government intervention involved, right? But tell me something. in a city of millions, millions of people who are walking about, who are traveling from one place to another, is it possible for law enforcement to enforce something as simple as, are all those millions wearing a mask? And the obvious answer is no, it is not possible, right? It is not possible. In other words, many of these directives, which all have the authority of law, because they've all been passed by a state government or a central government, they all have an authority of law. Many of these directives cannot be fully enforced. Certain shops were told, certain areas in the past were told, you can only open your shop from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. That's it. 9:30 a.m. I call up the shopkeeper and say, Bhaiya, 2 kilo tori hogi, and he sends it to my house, right? So is this illegal? I will say yes, it is, right? Because we know what the law is, we know it's not going to be enforced, and therefore we're taking advantage of it because we were not caught, right? Now, of course, in certain places, if you do get caught, there's a fine, obviously, great, right? But this is where I will want to sort of put forward a theory of self-enforcement. As citizens of India, as citizens of a state, we have been given certain directives from the government, right? And we have been told we should do this, we should not do this. And we generally follow rules as long as somebody is watching, as long as we are being surveilled. But when there is no surveillance, off comes the mask and we go and party in whatever places we want to party. Here is where I would like to urge our listeners, our students, to consider whether or not there is a space in our mindset, whether or not there is a space in our psyche to think conscientiously, to think morally, to think ethically about what is good and what is not good for ourselves, our family members, our community, our nation. That what happens when the watchdogs aren't watching? Can we watch ourselves? Can we take a look at whatever the government directive is and say, you know what, the government has done this for a reason. We trust, we have faith in the government, we have faith in the experts that are running ICMR, etc. Let us trust them, let us have faith in them, and let us do on our own what they have asked us to do. And this can apply not just in cases of, let's say, legal management of COVID, which is just an example. But if there is no speed gun, if there's no speed radar, what is stopping you from going beyond the speed limit? In other words, there's this old English saying that if a tree falls in the woods and there is no one there to see it, did the tree actually fall? In other words, if I cut down the tree and nobody saw me, did I actually cut down the tree? So I would like to take this opportunity and this platform to urge our faculty members and our students to start thinking about a self-reflective enforcement of law. And I'll tell you what, and because this is very dear to me, I can actually, with some authority, say that this is not a new theory, right? For those of you who may have studied the Mahabharata or the Gita, this is exactly what dharma is. Dharma is what you would do when your inner voice tells you to do, right? So in other words, and I'm going to keep this short, I'm going to end off over here. In terms of legal management of COVID-19, the central government, the state government, they can put out any and all directives as they want. Law enforcement, otherwise known as police, will enforce, will check, will carry out whatever fines and spot checks that they need to, but they can't cover everyone. Who then must cover for them? It is us, conscientious citizens of India and whatever state you belong to. Only then, I believe, that we will be able to achieve a better implementation of laws in India. They say that India is a country of great laws but poor implementation. This is, symptomatic of what our country is right now. How can we change it? By enforcing the law ourselves, right? I'll leave you with a small anecdote. It was some football World Cup many years ago, and I believe it was USA versus Japan. And Japan lost to USA. And this was not in Japan, of course, some other country. And to the surprise of millions of football fans all over the place, the Japanese supporters simply bowed and started cleaning up the stadium. They cleaned it up before they left. That is a kind of self-enforcement of their own social norms. Let's start thinking about our own self-enforcement, not just of social norms. Let's start with the law first. With that, I will hand the virtual mic back to Professor Rajesh. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Sir, it was very fantastic, sir. Sir, basically, you have really explained that why this enforcement is mandatory, and whenever the self-enforcement is you are taking insight and your conscious mind is taking, then and then this can be implemented. No doubt the central government will make any laws and state government will make any law, but until his conscious mind is not applicable, then they will not adopt, then it cannot be possible.
Absolutely.
So now I am handing this session to our one of the toppest advocate from the Supreme Court, Mr. Viswajit Chaudhary, who is a very close friend to me also. So I am handing this session to you. He is one of the very energetic guy at Supreme Court. Sir, I am handing the session to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I think I'll begin by, first of all, saying a big thank you to Dr. Singh, Dr. Rajesh Singh's enthusiasm. I think every time I've spoken to him, his enthusiasm is so infectious that despite us, busy schedules, I've never had the heart or the courage to say no, because all his sessions are so meaningful, engaging, and deeply engrossing. And also they're very timely because he has this knack of thinking of things that are very contemporary at that point. I'd also like to thank Professor Vaidya and Dr. Syed for joining in. It's an absolute honor to be with all of you. I'd also like to say that what Professor Majumdar said, I think he laid such a beautiful foundation for what I was going to say. And in fact, he has said many of the things that I was going to say. So as he was speaking, I was sort of going through my notes and scribbling them up, and I'll try to live up to that expectation that Professor Majumdar has very rightly said. So I think one of the things that has, of course, come across quite clearly in Professor Majumdar's in his presentation was the concept of enforcement. And I think that is something that I'll come to right at the end, because as they say, a law is any law is only as good as the enforcement that it enjoys, because you can make all the laws that you want, but unless there is enforcement, it becomes completely a futile exercise to be even making these laws if the concept of enforcement does not exist in its entirety. I think also it has to be noted that not all laws would enjoy 100%, 100% agreeability, 100% compliance. But as far as most of the people are complying with the law, most of the times, I think it could be said to be a somewhat successful piece of legislation. However, what I wanted to say about this particular instance, and I think Professor Majumdar very beautifully covered how historically the lockdowns came, and then the lockdowns were slowly removed, and how the two major pieces of legislation were used in order to tackle this. And it was quite a surprise, especially for us as lawyers, because I think it was about December when the first signs and the first infections were reported from across the world. At that point, of course, India was isolated because it was seen to be a particularly bad virus, but sort of located within China and not outside of its borders. But soon enough, we realized that that was not to be. And in March, we started seeing some cases. Then, of course, there was the first lockdown, and then the cases surged in the second lockdown. And then since then, we have been sort of seeing and working around what tweaks with the lockdown. Now, one of the strongest things that we use in the law, and any student of law, and in fact, anybody who follows law, especially common law, the value of precedent. And lawyers and judges, we are always looking at how do we decide cases. And one of the ways of deciding cases is to indeed look at what the past decisions have been and then to apply them to the facts that are at hand. Call it the beauty or call it the misfortune of COVID. We did not have any precedent because this was a situation which was just uh, not even foreseen, but definitely something that had not happened in our living memories at least. And then all of a sudden we were thrown into this massive pool of all kinds of confusions where a number of tensions were there. And then we had to come up with solutions which were sustainable, which were agreeable, but which were also effective. And to do that, we didn't have time. It wasn't, one of those situations where you could deliberate and then come up with. And we were evolving the situation as and when it was going. But there are 2 or 3 significant things that happened. I think the first thing that I would like to speak about is how this instance helped in the churning of institutions. I think one of the words that we've heard the most probably during this entire chaos is the word unprecedented. I think if I were to write a journal, and I actually do maintain a journal, and I write down some of the things that I've heard or said on that day, and the words that I've probably said the most during the past year and a half would include unprecedented and challenging and problematic. And can you hear me? Because these are the things that we keep on saying, change the way we live. So one of the things that I think it did and which could be seen as a positive sign is that it really churned the institution. And I think whenever there is a problem, whenever there's adversity, and whenever there is something that is amiss, you see that institutions as well as practices, they undergo a very, very strong churning. And I do believe that that churning has a great value to it. In fact, my one of the best advocates that I've come across, Mr. Siddharth Luthra, who is a senior advocate, he even in his interviews, he always says that the institutions need to go through churning because only through churning that you see what remains as substance and what doesn't. So I think one of the things that it did was it churning of the institutions happened to an extent that we saw what were the shortcomings of the institutions, what their strengths were, and how we could work with both of them. And this was both an internal mechanism as well as an external one, where the institutions were tested from both the ends of internal and external. For instance, how would the Supreme Court or any court indeed function during this pandemic? And we just had to work our way around that. It was also real life testing, and many of the reports and many of the papers and many of the things that you read, and including some of the Law Commission reports, are not necessarily based on what the past has been or what the current experience is. They're usually based on hypothesis or speculation. But here we were in a real time situation, which was an emergency, where we had to look at what the alternatives were. So that churning really allowed us for some kind of tweaking the system, working with systems differently, and looking at how we can make them work. So one of the first things that happened as soon as the pandemic started was you were not allowed as many people in the courts. I mean, this is after the lockdown. I mean, initially when the lockdown was there, the courts were shut. But after that, you were not allowed as many people. You were only allowed 1 or 2 people per case. The second thing that happened was everybody had to cover their faces, etc. But most significantly, we started this concept perhaps in mass for the first time in India. And this comes at a very interesting and significant time, because it comes shortly after the Supreme Court in a judgment said that perhaps the best way to monitor the proceedings of the Supreme Court would be to start live streaming of all the courts across the country, because that makes justice accessible. And when we saw that, justice really came at our doorstep in many ways. And the video conferencing of the cases ushered in a new era, which was technologically possible during this time. And that also, so those were some of the positives where it was very convenient. So for instance, earlier if somebody was sitting, let's assume, in Ahmedabad and they had to come to the Supreme Court, it is a bit of either a drive or a flight or a train. But there were many instances where now people just didn't have to come to the court. For instance, not to the Supreme Court. They could sit at the comfort of their home and still appear. That was the upside. But the downside of the same coin was the problems that we saw in terms of accessibility. Not everybody had the resources to be able to, for instance, even buy laptops or use strong Wi-Fi connections to be able to come to the court. That was one of the big problems that we saw, and that opened an entire debate about how do we work with accessibility. As far as the laws are concerned, we've seen that there is, of course, the Disaster Management Act as well as the Epidemic Act, which were, again, these pieces of legislation which hadn't been used for a very long time. I mean, they had been in one or two cases, but this sort of impact of theirs had just not been seen in the past few, at least in living memory. And we see that the law was brought into force. And the second thing that it did, other than churning of the institutions, was also to see what the powers of different people were. And we saw there were all these instances where powers of, for instance, ranging from a police officer all the way to the Prime Minister's office, they all came under the scanner of who could do what legitimately. And that raised some very interesting constitutional points, which meant that we had this open, fair, and you know, the discussion really came to the fore of what are the different kinds of powers that one can use. I think you'll all also agree with me that the other power we also saw was the power of the parliament. What is it that the parliament could do? How do we have the parliament functioning during these times when you cannot meet in person? And these really were things that we had previously not been able to test because we didn't have the need to test. But now that we did, it made it easier for us to be looking at some of the nuances in this step. Now, when we also look at law, the law has, I believe, two very significant functions, and they're somewhat related. As Professor Majumdar said, I think one of the law's functions is to reflect what the society wants. And if you look at the legislature making process and also the court interpretation process, many times the courts would look at what is it that the society needs in that particular instance. And we've seen that one of the things when we are looking at the law is how the law reflects what the society wants. So people think, and quite rightly so, we all think murder is wrong. The law prohibits murder, so on and so forth. The other more significant function that the law also does is it molds the public opinion and it molds the way the society thinks. And that was, again, a very interesting thing that we've noted during COVID. How are we complying with some of the things that have come across during this time? So, for instance, there are many things in which the law reacted to the COVID crisis, but also how it reflected on the COVID crisis. So there are two aspects to it. One is reactive, which is how the law reacts and how the law almost not forces you, but makes you or demands compliance. And the second aspect is how the law allows for that flora and fauna to be in a perfect state where you can actually comply with the law. And these were two of the things that we saw happening during this period. And we see that there are, again, internal and external policies. So internally, for instance, we've seen that we have a backlog of cases. We had a number of increasing pressure and increasing demand on the already stretched courts. And we've all seen how many of the courts are functioning, sometimes even around 50% of the total vacancies there are. But we've seen that this crisis deepened that debate because justice became one of the things, not simply because the cases were pending, but also because a lot of the directives and a lot of the things that were passed by the various governments were actually challenged in court. So, for instance, if movement was stopped, that was challenged in court, both in terms of PILs as well as in terms of the various functions of, for instance, there were many cases where a shopkeeper had either been charged or indeed been arrested because their shop was open. So they were able to go to the court and actually test it. In the Delhi High Court, for instance, it was ruled that you can't use COVID to harass or to silence people. It has to be a judicious use of your powers. And that was one significant step in that direction. We've also seen how the advocates struggled across the country to meet the demands. In fact, it was very, very unfortunate, and of course, there's a price to be paid, and I think history will be a better judge of how the advocates and as well as lawyers they were a part of this entire thing. I personally know a number of lawyers who lost their lives, actually, some of them, because they did not have the luxury of being able to be at home alone. And in fact, there are a number of judges as well, including one honorable justice of courts in Delhi, where at least one that I know of, I'm sure there are more, who unfortunately could not make it through the crisis. And we really see how this has left a very, very unfortunate mark on the law, but also more generally at a human cost. And this tragedy that we saw was really one that shook the way we think and shook the way that we deal with crisis. And hopefully we've learned our lessons, which in the future we would be able to use in times like these. The other thing that we saw, again, quite significant, was how well we sometimes used at our resources that we had at our disposal. So for instance, many times when I was able to visit courts during this, you saw these makeshift almost rooms where, for instance, they had chairs, and on chairs they had kept a table, and on another table they had kept some files just to make sure that the laptop height was the right, because we didn't have the infrastructure for this. Nobody had thought about it, and nobody could have thought about it because it was one of those instances. So how we performed and what we did during this time really leaves a significant historical trace for us to come back to. But the churning of the institutions, as well as seeing the gaps in the internal working and the external working, has put us on a platform and has put us in a situation where we are almost forced to rethink of the ways in which we function. And because we are being forced to rethink how we function, it has opened that paradigm of possibility where we can actually ask us questions in terms of, number one, for instance, how do we appear? How do we treat litigants in person? How do we treat lawyers who appear to the courtroom? What is the value of a lawyer? What is the value of a judge? And how do judges decide cases? Because some of the cases, of course, in the Supreme Court were decided on the merits that were very, very peculiar to the COVID pandemic. It also brings me to the next point, which I think especially for the audience is quite significant. That we see some of the things that were previously the preserve of a certain field actually opening up. So for instance, when we were looking at the court system, one of the first things that we did was to experiment online hearings. And you see that when you're experimenting with online hearings, or indeed with any such thing, one of the first things that you do is you're looking at a number of fields. And that interdisciplinarity and that approach, which was multidimensional, allowed us to come with solutions that were not just from the law. So enforcement, of course, was a point of view that had to be seen. But more importantly, we started looking outside the box of law, outside the body and the corpus of just what the law is. For instance, one of the first things that we saw was the role of technology. How can we use technology to our advantage? This was seen across the board when we, for instance, looked at a number of things, including technology as used in video conferences, as well as in case management. The briefs which we used to receive earlier, sometimes running into thousands of pages, were just being sent via email. Court registries where you had to earlier go physically to submit your files were now accepting things online. Of course, this was well on its way. The technological adaptation of the courtrooms was on its way. But this crisis simply escalated it, and it served as a catalyst in the development. We've also seen how a number of other interactions between the courts. For instance, there were instances where earlier physical documents from Gurgaon had to be transferred all the way to Punjab and Haryana, which is a good 3.5-4 hour drive. We saw that was a more seamless process happening. But there were also problems which made us think about the justice system. And one of the main problems, for instance, and there's something that I heard from a number of criminal lawyers, and they've also written about it, so it is publicly accessible, is that one of the things that happened was how comfortable were we with trials happening online? How comfortable were we with appearing online? Because a whole huge part of a trial is, for instance, assessing the body language of the accused, etc., etc. So we had to think about what other things, and this, for me personally, it really made me step back and think that how is it that we interact with the law? And that, I think, added another dimension of understanding to it. For instance, just looking at the psychology. I spoke to a few academic friends of mine, including Dr. Rajesh Singh. And one of the things that we discussed was how teaching has completely changed and how it has transformed. Earlier you could see how students are reacting, and then make your mind about whether you need to repeat the concept or whether it has been understood. That was not necessarily happening during this time. So we had to look at other means to test how the things were being received. So I think we all also received somewhat mini classes in understanding what psychology went through, what psychological thoughts went through the minds of people, including lawyers as well as judges. Equally significantly, we were looking at the economical aspect of it. So for instance, the Disaster Management Act, the various policies that were coming ahead were in many ways dictated by the economics of things. For instance, construction workers, or when they could function. One of the ways in which it was dictated was indeed how the economy was functioning. Equally, a number of instances, for instance, there were many institutions which completely shut. The courts had to decide the financial interest on the one hand to make sure, for instance, hotels, etc., were able to remain open. On the other, they had to have the public safety aspect of whether the risk of contamination overweighed the losses that these industries would make. And we kept on revisiting this and still continue to revisit this. For instance, the Delhi government has announced only recently that Monday all the schools would be open to full capacity. If I'm not mistaken, cinemas as well will be open to full capacity. And that, in the administration of law, was a very, very interesting concept, because really we looked at law not just from a paradigm of enforcement, not just from a paradigm of how we react, but how do we take the different considerations which happen to have an impact. And that really created this trail of the law enforcement and the law crackdown on one hand, and the impact that it has on different sections on the other hand, including how technology can play a part in this, how well or how badly we can manage it, but also the psychology of how things would unwrap. And that really brought law a fresh breath of air. Not that it hasn't happened before, it had. But for many, it was really to revisit the functionality of law, looking at the constitutionality of it, but also to it from a lens that included the lens of technology, the lens of economy, the lens of psychology. Perhaps most significant for this group, it also included the lens of management, Because when we were looking at various acts and various provisions, one of the dictating factors was how are we going to manage it? So for instance, one of the cases that came in the Delhi High Court was whether a car is a public space or not. If you're driving alone in a car, are you allowed to remove your mask? And that was not just a question of law, because number one, it dictated the behavior across the NCR, across the territory. Number two, it also was the psychology that went behind, in the first place, enforcing that rule. So we see that law, technology, psychology, economy, as well as management all became these tools which were complementing each other in coming up with a solution to a problem that we had just not seen before in our living memory, and a problem that we had no set answers to. And I think that was one of the new ways of approaching this where there was no precedent. I'm sure unprecedented is what we keep on hearing in our everyday lives, and things that we had previously not even thought of have now become a part of your daily routine. I mean, anybody who lives in Delhi NCR would know that come winters, the pollution sometimes used to be bad, that you would have to wear masks. But wearing masks as a necessity and wearing masks to make sure that you and others around you remain safe has really, really been a response from the law that is keeping in mind with all the subject areas that I've just talked about. However, the gaps certainly remain. Enforcement has to be there. Now, how are we enforcing this remains to be seen, because we've really not come to the perfect formula. I remember initially when it was a really bad situation, there was a huge fine up to the limit of, I think, 5,000 rupees or something along those lines in Delhi, where you were instantly fined, even if you were in your car. We've also seen that the other mechanisms of enforcement is perhaps not just looking at coercion, but also to look at enforcement mechanisms that are thinking of actual, for want of a better word, capacity building, where the demand for enforcement comes from within, and it comes because it's genuinely good for you rather than because it has been told to you that it's good for you. We've also looked at the role of the civil society, because really at the end of the day, it has to be something that comes from the civil society. And rather interestingly, it has to be something that's not just top to bottom, but it's also bottom to the top, because everybody in between has to be involved. Only then can we have 100% enforcement. But most importantly, perhaps, we've also looked at the impact of it, which has allowed us and which has really given a glimpse into the proportionality or lack thereof of how we deal with these situations. So for instance, if one of the first things that came as a directive was that if you were living in a house and if somebody was indeed infected with COVID, the first thing was to isolate them, which for many might have been a distinct possibility. But for a number of people, and I know people who are, for instance, living in very, very small houses, and sometimes these houses are not even 100, 200 square feet. And there's just, by way of house, it's just one bedroom with the kitchen inbuilt and the bathroom, sometimes not even there, sometimes outside. We see how disproportionately some parts of the population might have been affected, including, for instance, in cities, right? They say 6 feet, you should practice social distancing as much as possible. But we see that there is really not that much sometimes which is allowed. So for instance, if 5 or 6 people were living in a tiny house, how do we expect them to be out of proximity of each other? So the other thing that we also need to think is the role of necessity. How many breaches actually happened due to the necessity that the people actually had to breach, right? And that is another factor which has to be taken into account whenever we are looking at how we deal with this crisis. My sincere hope remains that we will not see another such crisis in not just near future, but even distant future. But if we do, there are three things that have come out of this crisis. The first one is the robust systems that we've seen. And despite all the challenges, and despite all the things that were going wrong in the systems within, before, and after, we have to look at how the systems actually emerged. And in many ways, we did so much better than a number of countries in the Western world, where the courts were simply not, for instance, accessible. So I think that is a slight cause for celebration, where the courts, there was, of course, disruptions, but they worked to a huge capacity, which previously would not have been thought. So the robust systems were not just the courts, but even if we look at, for instance, the parliament and other institutions, we see that a lot of them were working almost full time. The healthcare system was stretched and tested to extremes. And yet, in many ways, we've seen that it did come out in many ways, which was really celebratory. The second thing that we've learned, and perhaps we should learn a bit more about, is the civic participation. Unless the civic society is a party to this, we've seen that there is really no possibility of a complete compliance, because law can only do so much. Even if the government decided or the state decided that we want 100% enforcement, that would really not be possible because it has to come from the civic society. So this has really made us think about how we should engage the civic population more in the discourse as well as the discussions. The third thing that we've seen is how we need to build a capacity for everybody who is involved, including all the lawyers, including, of course, all the judges, but more importantly, people who are really the ground foot soldiers. For instance, people working in universities. For instance, the teachers who have been taking classes. I have heard of instances where there were many teachers who had not so much as touched a laptop in their lives. And then all of a sudden, all their classes were happening online. I know of many lawyers who did not even use phones, but once this happened, started looking at the phones. So we've paid a great price, especially the lives lost due to this pandemic in all professions, not just lawyers, of course. And it has been a very, very unfortunate tragedy that the world has witnessed. Having said which, it has given us ways to think and to act so that the future we are well prepared or better prepared, and hope that we have good civic participation, and owing to that civic participation, we are able to overcome through this unprecedented crisis. With that, I end my presentation, and thank you everyone for listening.
Sir, it was a really very fantastic session by you, Viswajit sir. You have elaborated with the systematic approach that what was the scenario and how it has come, how the pandemic has come. And I know when you were also in the pandemic situation, when I was in touch with you, you also get the COVID instances. So you know more better than me. Sir, we have certain questions on this topic particularly. Sir, our teachers are very much enthusiastic. They have learned various things in this pandemic situations, and we have various laws in our university. Sir, what suggestion you can give that our teachers as well as students should cooperate with the systematic approach that our university will going to develop with the COVID culture, so that everyone, all the students are wearing the mask and all, they are performing the functions of the university as per the compliance. And we have different committees also, and we have motivated our students also. So what message you can give to our student that in so that in the future also what precautions they should adopt so that they should fight with again this situation if suppose any situation will come in their life. Vishwajit sir, to you sir.
Thanks very much, Dr. Singh. And I think that's a wonderful question. And the answer to that is going to be fairly swift and fairly brief, because I think the first thing is to actually finding about what is happening in terms of the pandemic. So for instance, what you're doing right now and what we are doing right here is building that capacity and is actually training people. And really this goes a long way in ensuring that there is compliance. Of course, I'm not a medical health expert, and I am not somebody who'd be able to advise on particular things that one could do. But I think now it's almost become public knowledge where, for instance, you're expected not to go to places unless it is absolutely necessary, to stay out of crowds unless it is necessary, to always wear your mask, maintain 6 feet distance, sanitize your hands, wash your hands as frequently as you possibly can. And I think the most important thing that I would say that is important for us to understand is, one of the things that happened is that there might be this inertia where one thinks, well, it happens to somebody else, I won't get it, or it won't happen to me. But to really, it can happen to anybody, and everybody is so vulnerable. So there has to be this selfless and this empathy that needs to be inculcated in everybody to be sure that anybody could be impacted by it. And I think the way forward is exactly things like this session that you've organized, where we are able to have a conversation about it and to look at the problems that might come, and to think laterally as well as vertically to make sure that we are able to make a difference. Back to you, Dr. Singh.
Thank you, Vishwajit sir. Now the other question from one of the associate professor, Mr. Kalpesh Gupta, has put it, which is on the screen itself. What is your opinion on having the Public Health Act? This was the question. Professor Ajay sir, are you there, sir?
Right, I'm very much here. However, I have not had the opportunity to take a look at the Public Health Act in much detail.
Okay.
But I'm quite certain. I don't know if Mr. Vishwajit Chaudhary.
Yeah. We will give this question to Vishwajit sir. Yes, Vishwajit sir. Now this question to you, sir.
Thanks very much. I think as I understand, and perhaps it can be clarified from Mr. Gupta, if my Public Health Act, are they referring to the ordinance that was, I think, operative sometime during the 1990s, if I'm not mistaken? Otherwise, in Public Health Act, because there can be at least 3 aspects to it. The first one can be how different authorities can use a public health emergency in order to come up with notifications, directives, etc. And that goes into an entire discussion of constitutional law, including the role of primary legislation versus delegated legislation, and what would be within the wires and what would be outside the wires. So that's the first aspect. The second aspect would be if the question is related to public health in terms of the providing of public health services. I think there possibly is a time, because this is not something that didn't happen. It was happening in the past, where a number of states, they, for instance, had to fix the charges that one could charge for conducting a test. They had to look at different things. So I think Public Health Act, if we are to look at sort of this whole consolidated legislation, which might be the way forward, I think one of the first things that we need to look at is how do we react to it? So both the beneficiaries as well as the people who are providers of public health, including private hospitals, we need to have an assessment and really a stakeholder engagement with them to see what works and what doesn't, including the cost of it and who can do it. But absolutely, I think this is something that we really need to discuss and have perhaps even a paper on. And I think Dr. Singh and Dr. Syed and Professor Vaidya being in academic spaces, as well as Professor Majumdar, I think this could be something that the students can actually look into in terms of going forward. I would imagine that the starting point could be some of the things that we've discussed here, including how the systems responded and what could have been done and what we did well could be the starting point.
Very well answered, sir. One more question to Vishwajit, sir. Sir, right now the Supreme Court is running physically. So, sir, what means precaution the Supreme Court is looking in this pandemic after overcoming the situation? So, what are the basic compliances which the Supreme Court is taking? So, what we can also add in our institutes? Can you elaborate, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an excellent question. And the way the Supreme Court is functioning is so its capacity is back to normal. In fact, the Supreme Court, and kudos to the management, that the capacity of hearing cases was pretty much back to normal right after the pandemic. A number of judges also gave up their vacations, which was used for hearing. So the Supreme Court currently is running on a hybrid model where there are certain days, I think, if I'm not wrong, at least last week, Monday was a virtual day for some courts, and then Tuesday was one which was physical as well. So some of the things that they've done are really in line with the protocols required by the public health services as well as the government, including not overcrowding the courtrooms, having partition within the courtrooms where there's a glass. So, you know, especially the judges who've been sitting there and who come into contact with everybody who comes into the courtroom, I think their well-being also has to be taken into account, because they are there the entire day, and any particles, etc., that could possibly be released in the room, they are exposed to that all day. So physical, I think the other thing is the number of people who can enter the Supreme Court is, of course, it's still open, but it's reduced to lesser people than it used to be. So I think these are some of the things that could be done. For instance, formula, one of the things which could be learned from the courtrooms is that any meetings that happen are attended by a portion of the people. So there could be a system perhaps where classes are held in an odd, even, or whatever way you decide to do. Not everybody has to be there, so that physical distance can be maintained. And that really also cuts down your exposure by straight away 50%, which is absolutely brilliant. The second thing could be that we start adapting, as the Supreme Court has, to models where you don't have to do things that are necessarily done physically. The third thing perhaps could be to look at, as the Supreme Court has done, on who is able to enter the campus and who is able to go there as far as possible. Perhaps working from home can also be encouraged. But you know what, I think this is something that the Supreme Court as well as governments have also said repeatedly, that it would be really wishful thinking that the virus disappears and we go completely back to normal 100%. And that, as much as one would like to see, is not going to happen, at least in the near future. So perhaps vaccination encouragement is our best bet at the moment, including, of course, keeping in with all the other things. So for instance, wearing a mask in the court has become mandatory, as it is everywhere else.
Very well, sir. Now, another question to Professor Ajay Majumdar, sir. Sir, as OP Jindal University is one of the recognized university in India, and not only India, is a very famous name in entire world also. Sir, what the procedures your institute is taking for the students and for the faculties to overcome this situation, so that we can also learn from your suggestions, sir?
Right. Thank you very much for that question, Rajesh ji. And up until recently, a few months ago, I was handling admissions for the university, and this was one question that kept coming up, and we kept getting asked this question, that when will classes open up? As on date, as on the 30th of October, we are still running completely online. Our university is about 8,000 students strong. It's completely residential, and it's in rural Haryana, which means that getting to and from a railway station or an airport is a bit of a drive. Now, we have been sort of toying with the idea of opening up our university to fully vaccinated students. Having said that, the following were the questions and the issues that sort of came up. If our students are going to come back on campus, will they be allowed to move out? Because we are a completely residential campus. We can try to enforce our students to stay on campus, not move out to go to a local tea shop or whatever, right? which would amount to restriction of freedom of movement. At the same time, our faculty members and our staff members, they are free to move in and out of campus. So that right there is discrimination. So these were the issues that kept coming up, that, do we open up, do we not open up? Unfortunately, the Haryana state government has told all residential colleges to stay shut for now and to have an online, these classes only. Having said that, and I just want to pick up from where Vishwajit mentioned that any response to this COVID-19 pandemic, any lasting response to this COVID-19 pandemic cannot be unidisciplinary. It has to be multidisciplinary. So even if we have some students back on campus, when us as faculty members are teaching, we should be able to teach those who are at home as well. And that is where technology comes to the rescue. So in each of our classrooms, we've installed, video cameras along with microphones. Now there's some technology involved where the video camera identifies the faculty member and moves with the faculty member, because you know how we are, we like moving around in a classroom, right? So in a hybrid mode, while you will have some students in class, you'll also have some students at home, students who can't come, who have not been fully vaccinated yet, whatever, for whatever reason, right? So that is where technology plays a role. That's one. Another place where technology will play a role is that of instant communication, including platforms like Zoom, MS Team, and etc. Right? What we've been using. But one aspect of legal education that we have sort of discovered and we've re-implemented is that of leaving aside learning by rote learning, right? So what would happen in a standard examination? You go to the examination hall, you sit down, you've got your answer script, your question paper, now you write the answers. At best, you'll have a bare act, at best. Now, if I'm going to assess my students on whatever I've taught and they're at home, right? They have all the, they have any and all material at their disposal, which means that as faculty members, as a university, we must start looking at how do I assess the student on application of the law, right? Now, as Vishwajit pointed out, the idea of precedence is of central importance to a common law country like India. Now, the question is not whether a student can remember the case law, right? But how do you apply that case law? For that, our pedagogy, our assessment patterns have to change, and they have changed, right? So right now, what we're doing is most of our examinations are open book. You can refer to any material that you want. In terms of opening up, what I'm saying that we will probably not open up anytime soon, over the next couple of weeks at least, or perhaps the next couple of months, because our last teaching day is 14th November, and then we go into our winter break. But so we're looking forward to reopening in February, which is when our classes restart. Again, measures that we have already taken is making sure that all of our faculty members and staff have been vaccinated. Whoever students are coming back, they must be fully vaccinated. There's a separate flu ward that we have created in our health center, right? Along with that, we've got the standard sanitation measures that I think every institution now has. So I think for universities as islands of study and working and living together, the risks of a pandemic are even worse, because you've got these thousands of students and faculty members and staff being together on the same campus. Now I'll just leave with a sobering thought. What if one person is infected and they are in contact with hundreds of people over a period of one day, right? And then when that news comes out, half of those 100 people are now carriers, and all of their parents are going to pick them up and say, "Beta, ghar wapas aa jao, come back home." And while they're going home, they're probably spreading it along the way. So these are risks that we really can't handle. We really can't foresee as to how we would prevent them. I think we'll still have to adopt a wait and watch approach, at least for the next couple of months. Back to you, Dr. Rajesh.
Yes, sir. It was very fantastic answer by you, sir. Now we have asked various questions. Now, sir, I will like to just invite Mr. Jatin Vaidya, who is the in charge of this COVID-19 at our university. Mr. Jatin Vaidya, sir, are you there, sir? Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please.
Sir, can you put your camera on, sir?
1
Hello.
minute. 1
Yeah.
minute. Yes, sir.
Now, Jatin Vaidya, sir, now if you want any suggestion that what our committee should do, you can put a question to sir, and then I will call Dr. Akhil
Yes, sir.
Sayed, then we will close the session.
Yes, only the basically what my suggestion is, if we keep this is something like we have to keep in touch with the students, the persons, because we cannot ignore or we cannot ignore the symptoms to come to whatever the threat come to for the future, because third wave of the COVID, we cannot ignore that part. People are, right now we see that many of the people are not have the seriousness about, and many of them now is COVID is gone now. It's nothing about COVID. So wearing mask is the main alternative, weapons. Like otherwise, what will happen if the persons who not wearing the mask? Then the chances of rapid again the fast movement of COVID in absence of these our mask. So during our visit and during our we have the all members searching. I mean, awareing the students. We are awareing, our goal is awareing the students. So if we join hands, everybody, because that is not a task of any one person. One person cannot change the movement, or one person cannot change the momentum or just change the system, unless and until it efforts comes through everybody. So this is only message. If we all are aware, even the cities, the persons, those who are well educated persons, and he knows about the cause and effects of the COVID. So if he even speaks to other people, those he can see the people right now afraid of to say something to other people. Why this is not my job? Why should I go for and to say something to others? But forget about, if we forget about the word, this is not my responsibility, then and then the change will definitely come, and we can keep away COVID from the third wave or whatever the things are rumoring in the area right now. So we can avoid such type of situations. And obviously, if we have such avoiding such type of situation, then that will be, we can live freely. Otherwise, again, we have to pack at the home. So better to not to come with such type of situation. Let us take initiative that you have taken a really wonderful, and I am appreciating your efforts, sir, and the experts, those giving the valuable remarks and valuable advices, valuable talks, whatever we can say. But it definitely reach to the our students from, and we take this message. We have to take forward to the our community and our college and our university everywhere. Thank you, sir. This is, I think so.
Thank you, Jatin Vaidya, sir. Now I will request Dr. Akhil Sayed, sir, who is the Dean and Director at Parul Institute of Law, to give a vote of thanks to our board dignitaries, and then we will close the session. Dr. Akhil Sayed, sir. Dr. Akhil, sir, are you there? I think he might went in some meetings. So, sir, doesn't matter, but it was really a very fantastic session by both of you, sir. You have spared a very valuable time to our university, and you have explained each and every aspect on the COVID. You have also ensured, and you have also helped that how we can change in our institute the various scenario that various question was put it to you both, sir, and you both are really remarkable that you have given a very special, and generally the people will not talk about these topics, but right now the situation is that the situation, if suppose third pandemic will come, So what precaution we have to take, and what there are laws, but how the conscious mind should already Professor Ajay Majumdar has clearly explained. And Viswajit sir has already explained about the legal aspect in a very detailed manner. So I am very much thankful to both of you, sir. And I am also thankful to Mr. Jiten Kubani, sir, who has given a very wonderful live coverage on the Facebook, as well to my faculties members. So on this note, I am very much thankful. And on the behalf of Parul Institute of Law, Parul Institute, we are very much thankful to you, sir, for this precious time given by you both, sir. So on this note, I am closing this session. So thank you, and thanks a lot to both of you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Dr. Singh. Thank you.
Thank you.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you,
It's
Jatin,
really
sir.
wonderful,
Thanks a lot.
sir. Thank you, sir. Really wonderful. We enjoyed a lot, sir, with the session.
Thank you, sir. Thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot,
sir.
sir. Thanks a lot. So we are closing, sir. Please, sir.